Well, first of all, I'm Mél Hogan. I'm the director of the EML, and I'm based in Film and Media at Queen's University in Kingston. Queen's University is situated on Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee territory, and to acknowledge this traditional territory is to recognize the significance for Indigenous peoples who lived and continue to live upon it and whose practices are tied to the land and continue to develop in relationship to the territory and its other inhabitants today. And because the event is online, I invite you all to reflect on the lands from which you participate in this today and every day. And I also want to recognize that we're living at a time of worsening climate crises, genocides, and an ongoing pandemic that's disabling and killing millions. And I say this because as a media scholar, I'm made aware that these are also times of incredible scientific and technological innovation, and that it's really the social and the political realms that are failing us. The talks today, each in their own way, address some of these complexities. And to this point, the theme for this year's residency is extractive media. And Susan Cal, who's at the University of Calgary, will be managing the chat. So please feel free to write your questions in there as we go. And Théo Lepage-Richer, who's a postdoctoral fellow at the University of Toronto, couldn't be here today, but he will respond to the talks as they're being recorded. So he'll respond to the talks after watching those recordings. And Théo and Susan, for those who don't know, have been the mentors part of this month-long residency and have been extremely generous with their time and energy. So thank you so much. So the order of the speakers today is going to be Kailey Walker first, Natalia Orrego, Helen Alexandra Hayes, and then Tinghao Zhou. And I'll introduce each of them very briefly before their presentations as we transition. Each presentation is between 12-15 minutes, and we'll discuss together at the end when all four presenters have finished their talks. So please feel free to leave questions in the chat as we go. And as you probably have gotten a notice, this is being recorded and will be uploaded to YouTube a little bit later on. If you want more information about these talks, the context, or next year's residency, you can go to environmentalmedialab.com. And we also have a journal called Heliotrope, which will feature some of these talks in a different kind of iteration, and that's heliotropejournal.net. And that's edited by the wonderful Tessa J. Brown, who's a PhD student in communication, film, and media at the University of Calgary. So I will pass over the mic to Kailey Walker, who is a first-year PhD student in sociology at Queen's University.
Okay, thank you, Mel. So today I'm going to be going over a talk called Greening Extractivism, the Case of Canadian Lithium. I can get it to present. So like Mel, I wanted to begin my talk by situating my relation to land and knowledge. So to acknowledge that Queen's University is situated on the traditional Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee territories. And drawing on Haraway and other feminist epistemology more broadly, I also wanted to situate my own identity and experiences within larger systems of knowing. This adheres to the perspectives that what is known and how it is known reflects the situation and perspective of the knower. So I am a white settler who was born and raised on the traditional territory of Anishinaabeg and Anishinaabeg near Sudbury, Ontario. I am a cisgendered, able-bodied woman. I am a first-generation student who moved to Kingston to pursue a BA in sociology when I was 18. I'm still at Queen's, but now in the first year of my PhD. And my family that's still in Sudbury owns a drilling and blasting company and is in the exploratory stages of opening a lithium mine. So as a first-year PhD student, this talk serves as a brief overview of the context and methods upon which I'm going to be undertaking my dissertation. As such, any questions, suggestions, and criticism are very much welcome at this stage. And the aim of my project is to map both the extractivist and justificatory dimensions of lithium extraction in Canada, And to do so, the material and symbolic dimensions of resource governance will be brought together to compare the socio-environmental effects of extractivism. On one hand, then, I'm going to be looking at the impact of mining activities on local environments and knowledge production. And on the other hand, the ideological framing which legitimizes or attempts to justify these practices. So to start, I want to contextualize why lithium is the mineral of interest for this project. The first consideration is that the substantial investment into both AI and green mineral industries by the Canadian government. In 2023, the federal government introduced the Canadian Critical Mineral Strategy to invest $1.5 billion to bolster and develop the extraction of select minerals, one of which is lithium. This investment is largely framed as a strategic move to propel Canada towards a more sustainable future. The second consideration is lithium's place at the beginning of digital supply chains more broadly. As I will briefly explain later in the talk, minerals are foundational to AI and green technologies, and as such, are important sites to study to capture the effects of supply chain capitalism more broadly. The third consideration is the increased media and industry attention on the mineral. CBC recently published Lithium, Coin the New Oil, is shifting global markets. It's elsewhere dubbed a techno mineral and is increasingly framed as essential for low carbon futures because of its central role in electric vehicles, batteries, and electricity grids. Mirroring metaphors of data as the new oil, these assertions underplay how resource intensive refining lithium is. Lithium is at its core a technofossil. It must be cultivated from its natural form into a saleable and then concentrated even more to be used in batteries and other technical elements. And then finally, lithium mining is most concentrated in the Lithium Triangle, which is a geographic area ranging from northwestern Argentina, southwestern Bolivia, and northeastern Chile. As such, the limited scholarship on lithium governance and green extractivism more broadly has been focused on these countries. With overt interest in developing lithium and related supply chains in Canada, there is an apparent research gap on the strategies and effects of lithium extraction in the Canadian context. So I thought this was probably a good time to define what I mean by greening extractivism as kind of the key point of the talk. So extractivism does not simply mean the use of natural resources, which is something that humans have been doing all along. Unlike extraction, extractivism is rooted in the central fiction on which our economic model is based, that nature is limitless and that we will always be able to find more of what we need, and that if something runs out, we can seamlessly replace it with another, that we can just endlessly extract that. More than just a way of using land, extractivism is also a way of thinking. It is a way of being in the world, a way of positioning ourselves in a relationship to the natural worlds we occupy. Extractivism in its many forms, such as mining, deforestation, is actually profitable because it does not account for its complicated costs: pollution, exploiting workers' bodies, loss of community, and so on, most of which are impossible to estimate. By avoiding both economic penalties and remediation for extractivist activities, states and corporations maintain the economically viable production of technical systems. So, greening extractivism then represents a development between mining and the environment, whereby extraction and valorization of minerals is to create not only compatible with sustainable development, but actually necessary for green futures. In the case of lithium, the ecological qualities of its use in batteries are uniquely extended to its extractive process. So this is not just a manifestation of greenwashing mining, but it's the argument that the benefit of green technologies outweighs the harms of extracting lithium. In this way, green extractivism points to the contradictory character of climate change mitigation strategies that rely on intensive mineral extraction. There's an excellent body of work that traces the socio-environmental impacts of digital technologies along their supply chains. In general terms, this begins with mining and extends to when batteries and digital devices become e-waste. This work emphasizes that ICT and AI processes rely on extractive economies, both at the start of the supply chain when mining these minerals, but also when compiling the technologies, using these technologies, storing the data that these technologies create, and the eventual disposal of the devices. With lithium, the mine concentrate goes through various 4 rounds of refinement to produce a concentrated mineral using a lot of natural resource to do so and leaving behind waste in a few forms. This is to say the minerals essential to decarbonization and green technologies still exhaust non-renewable resources and energy even before they're transported for assembly and contribute to environmental degradation in a scale that is still comparable to fossil fuels. Growing demand for lithium also energizes ongoing environmental conflicts as previously inaccessible areas are being approved for mining. So, beyond overt force and violence, it raises the question of what strategies are being employed to legitimize these forms of extraction. Boskovinik and Andrucci argue that resource governance depends on developmental discourses as much as the territories where the resources are extracted from. Mining conflicts are not just struggles over territories and their adjacent resources, but nodes within broader contests over knowledge, worldview, identity, and configurations of what development should mean. And political ecologists have amply documented the ways in which corporate and state actors use discourse within territorial contests to safeguard these modes of resource extraction. So this brings me to kind of some general research questions that I'm working with right now, which are what discursive strategies are adopted by the Canadian state and corporations to legitimize lithium extraction, what ontological logics underpin these justifications, and how do the operations of extraction contribute to these dynamics? So as it stands right now, I have 3 main theoretical resources that I'm going to be drawing upon to conduct my research. The first is data colonialism, so drawing on work by Coldry and Mijas and Brody. Theories of data colonialism capture how power and authority in resource governance result in uneven outcomes along the lines of historical colonialism, ongoing settler colonialism, as in the Canadian case, green colonialism, and environmental racism. This is also supplemented by the framework of coloniality of power as proposed by Ricard, which integrates the coloniality of knowing and being, sensing, and how it can be employed in subdimensions of the economy, politics, knowledge, being, and nature, which kind of brings together this other dimension as well, which is Povinelli's Gianto power. And this is the authority to discern between what is living and what is not. And it includes sets of discourses and the like to make the distinction between life and non-life. And important for this project, Gianto power specifically might help to underpin how discourses determine what can be extracted and at what cost. So through a critical discourse analysis and ethnography, my project will question the Western epistemological frameworks which justify the harms of resource extraction and expenditure as necessary for green energy transitions. The first phase is critical discourse analysis that will review public statements, initiatives, policies, news broadcasts, etc., as advanced by the Canadian state and corporations on lithium or green mineral extraction. I plan on starting data collection this summer, so I already have started to look at the critical mineral strategies, state policies, and corporate statements. And then this will be supplemented by the second phase, which is an ethnography of a lithium deposit in northern Ontario, which is in the Ring of Fire. And this phase is designed to recognize both the corporate and worker perspectives in mining activities to clarify the political and environmental effects of operations. And this field work is hopefully going to be carried out over 2 summers, which will be 2025 and 2026. And here I just kind of included a little example of what's in the mineral strategy and as a form of green extractivism. So there's no energy transition without these supply chains. Strategies will help lay the foundation for Canada's industrial transformation towards a greener, more secure, more competitive economy, also drawing in themes of nationalism, civilizationism, and the like. And then the ethnography, just a bit more information on that, is going to be near the Ring of Fire, and that's been identified as a priority project for Ontario in the provincial critical mineral strategy. It's located near Thunder Bay, and this is actually where the photos throughout the presentation were taken because I was able to go there in 2017 as it's a family member's deposit. So this is all kind of to say that research has widely documented the impacts of mineral extraction projects on local environments, the resistance of affected populations in the lithium triangle, the political implications for such responses at multiple scales. However, the extraction of transition minerals and those relevant, especially to the green economy like lithium, have received comparatively little attention. Similarly, little work is considered how greening extractivism might operate in a settler colonial context, taking into account the often conflicting political interests of local communities, corporations, and the state for regulation. I hope to empirically clarify these colonial practices and logics that underpin the social environmental impacts of lithium extractivism in Canada, to consider how knowledge production legitimizes extractivism by advancing a Eurocentric distinction between life and non-life. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kailey. That is so impressive. So Kailey's a first year PhD student, and so that presentation sort of lays the path forward. The next three are by PhD candidates who are further along. And so our next presenter is Natalia Orrego, who is a PhD candidate in anthropology at the Pontificia Universidad Católica de Chile. And I will pass over the mic to you, Natalia, and let me know if I can be of technical assistance here.
Thank you, Mel. A bit of a heads up to everyone. I'm currently passing through speech problems, slight impairments, so I currently find super hard to speak for too long. So I made a pre-recording to make things easier for everyone. So I hope you like my recording. I took the whole day, so it really is. I put my heart into this presentation. Here it goes. You have to tell me if you hear it. Hi, everyone. My name. Yeah. Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Natalia, and I am a PhD candidate in anthropology at the Pontificia Catholic University of Chile in Santiago de Chile. Of problematizing telecommunications under neoliberalism. Now, before getting there, a bit of context. My dissertation is about the 5G network rollout in Chile, and you can see the 5G network here at the middle of the picture, working with other networks as well. And I am using archive research and ethnography research to give a comprehensive look at the system. Now, to delve into the tale of the Christmas antenna, I will use a methodology inspired by Rafiko Reef's infrastructural story, and I will focus not on the system itself, but in its temporalities, its vitality, and how the microhistories of the system can also feed the system and making it what it is. And this way, I aim to see 5G in 2G. So, chapter 1, the system. Chile has several particularities. First, an economy based on extractive industry, copper, lithium, iodine, wood, different types of produce. This economy follows neoliberalism imposed more strongly since the dictatorship. Hence, it's a free market economy oriented towards exports with high privatization of core industries, organizations, and institutions. This system creates a lot of inequalities. So, for example, the 1% kept more than 30% of the incomes in the last decade. In this context, the Chilean economy has a strong dependency on the global north. And for example, copper is sent to China, lithium to China and Japan, and it's not precisely an industrial society, but a natural resources economy. And with this, and also adding, for example, countries prone to natural disasters make connectivity not only a value, but also part of the development model of the country. Puts telecommunications at the heart of the society and at the heart of the state and the private sector. And like this advertisement shows, I could take a time machine back to 20, 40, 80, 150 years, and I would have started this presentation the same way. Because capitalism, global north dependence, and also natural disasters put a central role to connectivity, almost on the verge to hyper-connectivity. Currently, Chile has set the indicators regarding internet views, internet penetration, social media use, phone use, and infrastructure reach. Some have called it several times the cell phone country. A bit over 30 million cell phones for around 90 million people, which makes almost 150% of the population with a cell phone. For context, Canadians only have 30 million devices for 40 million inhabitants. Connectivity is a culture. Connectivity is a value. Connectivity also is a national pride. Just look at the stakeholders' faces. Here they look super happy, especially the Minister of Transport and Telecommunications at the middle, inaugurating the first 5G antenna in the Antarctic. Chapter 2, the battle. So by the end of the 80s and start of the 90s, 1G, the first generation of mobile networks, was basically a plethora of different analog technologies, was an elite commodity. Cell phones were about $1,000, and all of the advertisements from that era were for businessmen just always on the go, doing their business, carrying their massive cell phones. Mobile systems were a duopoly. There wasn't that much competition, and in my case, I haven't found a specific evidence that antennas were a problem at this stage. Only just a couple of small controversies regarding tap cell phones because 1G wasn't a particularly secure network. Now, antennas became a problem with the rollout of the 2G network, the second generation of mobile networks, now digitized, standardized, and introducing stuff that we have to come to normalize, like text message and SIM cards. I will focus on a particular moment, 1997, when the first protest started. The first complaint against cell phone infrastructure started in September-October of 1997 in a particular part of Santiago, in an upper-class neighborhood in Ñuñoa. So, by September 27, a company demolished a house. Telephone company wanted to install an antenna without the proper permits. By October 17th, the neighbors demanded the municipality to intervene so the antenna wouldn't be built. And then neighbors noticed they were never consulted about this process. They say, and some still remark, that antennas are ugly, and when you see them, they can be a bit unpleasant. Specifically, they began to impact the property value of their homes. Another concern was the unknown effects of electromagnetic radiation. By October 27, the company tried to install the antenna again, and the neighbors noticed this. They called the police. The police requested to the company to show the permits, and as you already know, they didn't have them, which made the neighbors even more discontent. By October 28, they sent a letter to a national newspaper where they were showing their discontent both with the company and also with the municipality, because the municipality hadn't said anything about this situation. And by November 4th, they sent a new letter to the editor to another national newspaper explaining everything all over again. And in one day, this chaos ensued. By November 6th, the company tried to install the tower and the antenna all over again, and the neighbors obviously noticed it, and they put their cars so the trucks carrying the system wouldn't be able to pass. So, between November 7th and the 16th, the neighbors, now with the help of the mayor, finally could put a stop for the company to install the antenna. They put their cars, the municipality brought ping pong tables, football arches, so the street would be fully closed, so the trucks wouldn't be able to pass. In this period of time, there were also many hearings for the company, because the company was sued by the neighbors, but also the company sued the municipality so they would allow them to build the antenna. By November the 12th, a newspaper wrote, "The antenna work is just beginning." And in this case, and by this moment, many more protests in other parts of Santiago were arising, also pointing out to Entel, the company trying to build the antenna in the first place, Everyone kept waiting until November the 17th, which was a key day. The mayor had a meeting with the company, which I have little to no details, and also the governor of the region had a meeting with the neighbors. Here you can see him in the middle with the tie and the neighbors protesting. He went to see what was going on with this case to the demolished site, and it was awful because since everything had been done without permits, there were bad smells, there were still rats going around, and everything was in very precarious conditions. And by November 18th, there was a press conference where the mayor announced the agreement with the company. Ñuñoa won the battle of the antennas. There wasn't going to be a trial because the municipality agreed with the company to move the antennas and several others to commercial areas. So apart from relocating the antennas, the agreement also included a generous investment in light infrastructure for the municipality, particularly in the places where the antennas were going to be installed, the National Stadium and 2 squares, with one of them being the most important in this part of the city. Chapter 3, The Gift. Behold, the building of the Christmas antenna, a gift from Entel to Ñuñoa. And once the lights and the Christmas atmosphere goes away, only the immense 36-meter antenna will remain. The mayor, at the moment, defined this structure as a simple light tower. As he cheekily mentioned in that moment, you won't be surprised if tonight you see the Entel antenna disguised as an indecent Christmas tree. And by the next day, Christmas was inaugurated in this part of the city with a gigantic Christmas tree that Entel gave to Ñuñoa that was officially light on. And how the press said, the Saturday night was illuminated with a modern Christmas tree and the carols performed for the occasion. Eventually, the Christmas atmosphere went away with the carols and the lights. I followed this antenna through time through Google Earth, and you can see this very tiny straight shadow. You can see it in January of 2000, April 2002, November of 2003, when you can also see the antenna mast. And then you can follow it in January of 2004, March of 2004, until it disappears by 2005. I am not from this part of the city, so I went to search for the Christmas antenna. It wasn't there. All I could see was this metal gazebo where the antenna once stood up, now covered with climbing plants, a flowering bougainvillea. I took pictures of the flowers, I took pictures of the buildings, and maybe all I could see was the remnants of the base of the long-gone antenna that you could see in the floor, that the cobblestone was different right in the middle of the gazebo, but that was it. Mobile systems are made to be obsolete on a technological level, but if you think infrastructurally, the story is a bit different, because just like 5G has the speed of 6G, we all carry the remnants of systems like 2G every day with us. An infrastructure like mobile systems never disappears, only changes and only gets updated. So in this case, I turned around and began to looking for the antennas, and I saw them. I saw them right across the gazebo, and I saw this top of the building full of antennas in each edge of the building, looking at different points. I went to the archives of permits and regulations, and there it was. By 2004, the Undersecretary of Telecommunications gave a permission to Entel to change the Christmas antenna, the now long gone Christmas antenna, to put the antenna now in this building, looking back to the plaza. So now the epilogue. With the introduction of 2G, Chile became the first country in Latin America to have this system. Of course, the stakes were super high because 2G was already a commercial success in other parts of the planet. They were expecting to grow beyond what any other system had allowed them to grow before. What do you see beyond the Christmas antenna? I see a system that has become a need where the private sector has the same status as the state to give the service and also to channel the infrastructure. But also, you can see the loopholes in this system. For example, and just as the 1997 protesters showed, there was a limit of how much they could do because the state wasn't doing anything. The companies just wanted to install the antenna. And the same system, the same patterns of loopholes in the system, especially regulatory loopholes, keep existing. It is a super useful system until you see yourself beyond a consumer. Can we be more than consumers? And yes, the Christmas antenna shows protesters, shows spectators with different degrees of involvement in changing the infrastructure, even though they are almost outside of the conversation between the state and the industry. But they are there and they are involved in making the system. Also, I see a system that, just like Christmas, is decontextualized from this society. Imposition that is designed and created somewhere else and just gets implemented in the country. So some might call them gifts of development, gifts from the companies. But are there really Christmas gifts? I don't particularly think so, because Christmas here is not about reindeers, it's not about these cozy nights. It's just simply it looks different, and making a Christmas antenna in this context just reinforces how this system can be decontextualized when it moves. I see a for-profit system, a system that we have to make friendly because the system itself is not. This system, particularly the antennas understood as entry points of a larger information system, exists to gain profit from circulating your data from your cell phone to a data center. You can put it lights, you can put it as a tree, you can put it carol singers at the bottom. You can reduce its size like 5G is making at the moment. You can make them symbols for many things, but an antenna is an antenna. You can put it lights, you can put it ornaments, you can put the carol singers at the bottom, but an antenna is an antenna, and it's only a way to see us more directly how capitalism found a way to commodify communications, to turn this need into a for-profit system that starts with a cell phone and an antenna, then ends with a data center. So in your case, what can you see beyond the Christmas antenna? Gracias.
Thank you so much. Anyone who knows me knows I'm always a big fan of anything that has to do with infrastructure. So that was great, Natalia. Thank you so much. And so our next speaker is Helen Alexandra Hayes, who is sorry, I'm just admitting someone as I do that, is a PhD candidate in communication studies at McGill University. And I am very excited for everyone to hear this talk. So Helen, I'm going to pass it to you.
Awesome. Thanks so much. I'll share my screen. Awesome. So thanks, Mel, for the introduction and for organizing such a generative residency program over the last month. I'd also like to thank Susan and Théo for their insights on my writing, and my fellow residents, Kailey, Natalia, and Tinghao, for being such supportive colleagues. I'm really grateful to have met all of you and engaged with all of you, and I'm really looking forward to collaborating in the future. So, going into the residency, I was hoping to refine some of my ideas for a chapter of my dissertation about visions for energy transition in Canada. I wanted to think through different forms of change and their implications for evolving energy systems and climate policy in the country, including the logics that guide them and their intersections and divergences. So today I'll be discussing the discourse and framing of Canadian environmental advocacy by examining the influence of language used by oil and gas corporations on provincial and federal policy, activism, and public opinion about environment and climate solutions. I'll share some insights about the narrow confines of transition and transformation, which have been historically positioned as binary avenues of change, and briefly discuss how this language and the ontologies that accompany it have constrained regulatory responses to climate change, and importantly, to the vistas of imaginative activism for alternative energy futures in Canada. So, Canadians across the political spectrum want action on climate change. They're also increasingly unconvinced that individual action is adequate to the task. So expectedly, activists have taken up this call in protests for systems change. We also see political parties, leaders across the political spectrum, and companies and corporations increasingly mobilizing the language of climate action. The problem here is that many of these actors are deeply influenced and embedded in the fossil fuel industry, including governments whose economic interests clearly align with fossil capital. And thus, the extent to which these claims connect to meaningful or timely climate action is a matter of debate. This is characteristic of climate delayism, a discourse which accepts the existence of climate change and supposedly supports action to address it, but instead of actively working to deal with the issue, it seeks to create a debate about what should be done, who's responsible, and how we should allocate costs and benefits. For example, a recent announcement about the Bill Gates-backed Calgary startup Geologic AI has been framed as a step forward in climate action and the green transition. But a closer consideration of the technologies involved and the gap in the deployment and uptake of other already established technologies shows it's better understood as a form of climate delayism. In fact, reporting on this actually draws attention to the difficulty in making such technological systems functional, let alone widely adopted in the industry. The text reads, "You think about the technical requirements to really enable a clean transition. It's an enormous expansion of capacity." In this context, rather than the obstacles we'd faced with outright climate change denial, we can think of meaningful climate action as now being obstructed by narratives and ideologies that still promote change, but where that messaging's attention is focused or redirected onto the social or economic effects of climate policy. So let's look at this a bit closer. Cenovus, TC Energy, Suncor, Enbridge, Imperial Oil, and Canadian Natural dominate the fossil fuel industry in Canada and guide public discourse about Canadian energy, advancing claims of net zero by highlighting their green initiatives and clean oil and gas that can supposedly work towards environmental transition while sustaining Canadian jobs and strengthening the economy. We also see newer strategies undertaken by oil and gas industry coalitions like the Pathways Alliance that accept the basic tenets of climate change and the need for decarbonization, but position oil and gas as central to a path of innovation. Coupled with Canada's increasing focus on the funding of green tech development and more general social and economic policies like the Pan-Canadian AI strategy that heavily invests in technocratic governance solutions, the link between energy transition and technology has not only become ontologically embedded in the way that many Canadians view energy transition, but also seems to heavily support and further the oil and gas agenda. In fact, the Canadian government currently has 40 funding options and benefits for what they call green and clean tech, many of which are targeted specifically to industry or oil and gas organizations. A study from Carleton University's Re-Climate shows that this strategy seems to be having an impact, with many Canadians indicating strong support for energy transition, including through investments in green tech, while simultaneously viewing the continued production of oil and gas as a necessary part of Canada's energy future. In fact, a recent poll of Canadian adults found that most support further investments in innovative industries, and many Canadians say that innovation is the most effective way to combat climate change. This is unsurprising. Advocacy for green tech has been strong within the oil and gas community, and their lobbying works. So it may be obvious, the prevention of climate disaster requires grappling with the way oil has saturated social and political life. But increasingly so, it also requires grappling with how oil has saturated visions of environmental transition and transformation, for that matter. Energy transition involves material relations and typically favors some interests, actors, and stakeholders at the expense of others. It doesn't, however, necessarily involve the alteration of dominant institutions, practices, and social relations, which calls for energy transformation do. While some authors have applied the term transformation to narrow forms of change or solely to describe technological aspects of change, transformation is commonly used to refer to shifts characterized as more radical, comprehensive, unpredictable, and emergent. In this way, energy transitions and transformations operate on different social, political, and cultural levels with varying intensities. But increasingly, both avenues for change have begun to operationalize, center, and rely on technological innovation as central to their goals. But why is this the case? Where along the line did alternative energy futures become embroiled in language, discourses, and goals that are touted by the fossil industry? Of course, the oil and gas lobby wields an outsized influence over climate policy, and the rise of social media and petroturfing campaigns aids it. But we've now gotten to the point where this influence is beginning to constrain our frameworks for activism, the ideas we have to address climate change, and the language that we use to discuss it. This is a cycle of influence where energy alternatives have gone from the domain of counterculture to corporate mainstay, from communes to communication strategies, and from love-ins to logos. And at some point within this cycle, have been altered to fit petro agendas without us realizing. In her book, Cruel Optimism, Lauren Berlant observes and analyzes ways in which our optimistic attachments to certain systems generate the conditions of our own suffering. For Berlant, cruel optimism persists because the ordinary conditions of living in the present wear us down to such an extent that we continue to ride the wave of the system of attachment that we're used to, even when that system fails us and prevents us from flourishing. Green technology has crystallized the enduring hope for easy technological solutions to the climate crisis. It's been hailed as a magic wand able to rescue the world from its dramatic environmental failures. But is this really the case? Does technological innovation in the oil sands serve energy transition or transformation? Or is it possible that technological innovation in the oil patch is neither an example of transition nor transformation, but rather a function of cruel optimism that keeps us bound by the same fundamental forces that have always been. Put simply, has green tech and the industry funding behind it muddied our understanding of what energy transitions or transformations really are? Drawing on Berlant, Skye Richards refers to our binding attachment to oil and to the systems sustained by it as crude optimism. Like cruel optimism, crude optimism exists when we remain attached to the neoliberal values and good life privileges that are reproduced and reinforced by extractive logics. Understood this way, we might begin to consider dominant narratives of energy transition and even more radical views on energy transformation as enabling an energy impasse, a holding situation that doesn't hold securely, where one keeps moving but moves paradoxically in the same space. The energy impasse is a space of stickiness, of friction, that reinforces the status quo by foreclosing imaginative vistas of environmental change. And because oil is so deeply stuck to and embedded within social, economic, and political structures and practices, it seems to have made alternatives difficult to imagine. These social and political impediments are often sidelined in climate conversations. Instead, without considering the appeal of and demand for narratives of climate delay, the liberal climate order remains vulnerable to challenge from those who don't shy away from giving climate action a compelling set of personal, political, and importantly, technological stakes. Moving away from these industry and government-backed tech solutions for energy transition and the concentrated patterns of control that accompany them raises important questions about how current forms of environmental activism might need to change. This isn't to say that activism and scholarship engaged in conversation with current visions of energy transition or transformation are unproductive or unuseful for thinking through effective social and ecological change necessary to get to a world after oil. In fact, it's quite the opposite. They provide us with a broader awareness of climate issues. They've certainly changed the political tide on climate change in the country and have done important work to empower Indigenous voices in climate debates. But to wholly move away from oil and not just reduce our dependence on it may require new forms of utopian thinking and feeling. To move beyond the energy impasse, to anticipate the potential of moving outside established structures of advocacy and current views on green tech-based transition or transformation, requires that we constantly grapple with the dominant cultural, political, and economic forces behind our visions for energy futures. After all, we must move away from oil in order to protect the future of the planet, but to do so requires us, as Naomi Klein writes, to change everything. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Helen. It's so nice to, after discussing these for the month, to see, like, hear the presentations. It was lovely. So we have one more presenter, Tinghao Zhou, who is a PhD candidate in film and media studies at the University of California, Santa Barbara. I am very excited about this presentation. So Tinghao, I will pass over the mic to you.
Thank you so much, Mel. I will share my screen. All right. Hi, everyone. So I wanted to start off also by saying thank you to the mentors of our virtual residency for their generosity and willingness to build this community. I really appreciate this opportunity, for us to gather together and share our work. So I really appreciate that. I used my time at the residency to continue working on the perspectives of my dissertation, tentatively titled at the ends of media, e-waste pollution, secondhand extraction, and environmental politics in Guiyu, China. So my main theoretical intervention is centered around this concept of what I call secondhand extraction. It refers to both the subject matter and the methodology of the research. So here I try to conceive secondhand extraction as different forms of environmental and epistemological mediation in the process of e-waste recycling. So I also think this concept aligns well with the theme of our residency this round, and I'm looking forward to hearing more feedback on this. So I'll get started. Imagine if the simple act of breathing, our basic survival instinct, became a perilous threat to our well-being. Since the late 20th century, rural coastal towns in China have been illicitly receiving Western e-waste, leading to severe ecological disruptions. Among these towns, Guiyu, situated in southern China, emerged as one of the world's largest e-waste recycling centers, becoming the central locale of the famous environmental report and documentary Exporting Harm, done by Basel Action Network and Greenpeace at the beginning of this century. So Guiyu epitomized environmental degradation in an alarming atmospheric form. Locals coined the term Guiyu Wei, the odor of Guiyu, to describe the toxic air that renders even breathing a precarious action. Over the past decade, the Chinese government has initiated environmental control projects and policies to combat e-waste pollution. The objective is to formalize Guiyu's informal e-waste practices into nationwide projects of the second-hand circular economy industry, 二手循环经济产业, and to extend this model globally within the Green Belt and Road Initiative. So set against this transitional era, my dissertation explores how the global e-waste economy tangibly reshapes the natural environment, laboring bodies, sensoria, subjectivities, and politics in local areas, often perceived as peripheries of globalization. Building on China's political economic concept of 二手 or secondhand, it conceptualizes this concept not only as the material process of dismantling secondhand devices and extracting minerals, but also as the extraction of precarious local labor and natural resources due to involuntary exposure to environmental toxins during those processes. Through sensory ethnographic methods like the smell walk, my project records and to reflect on the breathing practices and experiences of local residents as their survival tactics in the chemically polluted environment. Moreover, it investigates how this environment is monitored and governed through the extraction of environmental data and how these activities have shaped the evolution of environmental science and forensics as state-level projects. So the focus on China's environmental governance and infrastructures examines how they serve as pathways to also achieve China's geopolitical aspirations in exploring new resource frontiers within its domestic space and across the globe. Media studies has traditionally focused on aesthetics or cultural analyses of media content, viewing media as forms of representation or as channels for information exchange. So to challenge this paradigm, I adopt this materialist perspective in media studies, investigating the often overlooked material composition and energy sources that underpin media technologies. Informed by environmental and energy humanities, post-colonial theories, and political geography, materialist media scholars, including Sean Cubitt, Jussi Parikka, Macarena Gomez-Barros, Nico Starzelski, Yuri Fluhata, and Mél Hogan, they not only identify mines and mineral sediments scattered across the world's rural landscapes as the origin of digital media's life cycle, but also as key sites of extractive capitalism and political struggles. However, in the era of global media economy, the sourcing for digital media might occur at so-called the ends of media, as exemplified in e-waste processing site like Guiyu, where local workers retrieve minerals from discarded e-waste. The persistent ecological disturbances witnessed in Guiyu emphasize that the ends of media do not signify the ends of their cultural narratives and political discourses, but rather represent an alternate phase characterized by resource, labor, and data extraction. Guiyu served as my central case study not only due to its haunting history of environmental pollution caused by the e-waste industry, reflecting the shared issues present in various media endpoints globally, but also because of its geopolitical position as a principal experimental area for China's secondhand circular economy. In this context, Guiyu functions as a key junction within the global media economy, facilitating the flow of digital waste, and also serve as a domestic resource frontier supporting China's circular economy initiatives. So my dissertation aims to adopt a local bottom-up perspective to trace not only the unequal distribution of material resources and waste across various global sites, but also the local community's responses to the socio-material aftermath of these operations. So the study delves into various forms of secondhand extraction, such as the physical and chemical processes of disassembling and recycling e-waste. It examines traditional practices in the informal e-waste industry in China, like shaoban, circuit board burning, and suanxi, exit water washing, through which valuable minerals are extracted. And I consider these practices of dismantling and extracting as more than just material processes of transforming and reassembling obsolete media. They also provide a more tangible way to comprehend the cultural and political relationship between media and the environment. And it shows how the global trade of e-waste and the recycling process have metabolically transformed the landscape, channel the elemental exchange between laboring bodies and non-human milieu, reorganized local people sensoria, mobilized multi-species agencies, and eventually reshape environmental politics in local areas like Guiyu. So the core analytic framework, as I mentioned, secondhand extraction finds its roots in the Chinese word "二手", used in Chinese parlance for the secondhand economy industry, embodying semantic complexity and conceptual depth. The term "二手" resonates with its English equivalent secondhand, implying an item acquired after being used by another, as defined by the Merriam-Webster dictionary. So secondhand extraction primarily denotes the process of extracting material value from secondhand electronics. However, it goes beyond this literal interpretation, highlighting the secondary yet equally critical form of extraction prompted by the planned obsolescence of digital media. While primary extraction occurs at the outset of media life cycles, sourcing resources from rare earth mines and oil fields to produce media devices and their infrastructures, secondhand extraction reviews the extractive nature during the end stages of media, particularly in the processing of e-waste. This aspect often remains hidden with the rhetoric of recycling and recyclability, commonly associated with the secondhand circular economy. It further reminds us that these recycling activities rely heavily on the exploitation of migrant or local labor and natural resources such as clean water, air, and biofuels. So this framework allows us to perceive e-waste recycling as an inefficient process, urging us to pay careful attention to the frictions, energy loss, bodily exhaustion, and sensory deprivation inherent in these practices. Furthermore, the term 二手 or secondhand bears potential for media theoretical thinking. Its second dictionary meaning denotes information received from or through an intermediary. By identifying an intermediary between information creators and recipients, the idea of secondhand underscores some of the fundamental dynamics of media communication. I use the term secondhand extraction not only to capture the process of extracting value from secondhand electronics, but also to construct a theoretical framework for understanding extractive processes such as e-waste recycling, labor exploitation, botanical mineralization, and pollution data collection, all of these as mediating forces with far-reaching effects on our society and planet. And this links media theory with technological and environmental processes while being able to reflect various facets of the local political ecology. However, a pre-modern usage of the term 二手 and prompts me to consider that secondhand extraction surpasses mere theoretical endeavor. A Yuan Dynasty history of drawings, 图绘宝卷, precious mirror of painting, employs 二手 to signify a work as not solely one person's writing, thereby illuminating the common notion of co-authorship in early Chinese art history. So my dissertation wants to take this early use of 二手 seriously, aiming to rethink our approach to media studies, center on local media experiences and practices. So the concept of secondhand extraction reflects its methodological commitment, actively incorporating methods such as field observation, interviews, sensory perception, digital investigation, archival research, and even media art production as forms of both consuming and producing secondhand knowledge. So unconsciously, this distances academic research from the fixation on claiming originality and firsthand knowledge, instead working towards a more community-based and locally situated co-production of knowledge. So I want to conclude my talk by briefly discussing the chapter breakdown of my dissertation and show the scope of my dissertation. So organized around three main themes: body, sensorium, and elemental. My chapters will delve into various aspects of encountering, managing, and reflecting upon discarded electronics and the process of recycling them. And I think all of them act as a conceptual cut that I'm quoting Sarah Camber and Joanna Zelinska here, temporarily stabilize the world into media, agents, relations, and networks. The first chapter will focus on the process of washing and e-waste recycling. So introducing the concept of fluid politics, I try to examine how forms of secondhand extraction act as intermediary processes that transform media forms and the bodies of laboring women, as well as the spaces of work and habitation and the broader economic infrastructure. The second chapter will explore how both the local population and the governmental agencies experience and examine the atmospheric environment. By critiquing the global exploitation of human labor and environmental resources, as well as the pollution control efforts, I will predominantly use or to look at environmental forensics and to argue that the latter fosters technological ableism, which is instrumental in shaping various forms of political and economic control within environmentally vulnerable societies. And then in the third chapter, I will investigate hyperaccumulating plants, which have been thriving in Guiyu's toxic soil, and those plants utilized in scientific research, media arts production, and regional environmental restoration projects as well. So I tried to conduct a thought experiment here, theorizing the toxin-absorbing plants in Guiyu as a form of elemental medium. So this perspective prompts the question: so what is the nature of hyperaccumulating plants as elemental media, and what relationships do they engage in and create in polluted soil and water, in the process of art making, and in infrastructural soil restoration projects? So that will be it. Thank you so much.
That is a stunning project. Thank you so much, Tinghao. I'm already excited for the inevitable book that will come out of this project, I think. Yeah, really, really inspiring. I think all of the projects are, incredibly sophisticated. And, you know, the sort of like, this residency is not a course, like we're not evaluating and we're not, you know, there to assess, but it's still remarkable just like how strong your projects are. And I just wanted to say that in a non-evaluative way, I guess. But I think also one of the goals, or the main goal of the residency, is to generate sort of a network of people working on similar themes. And so if anyone has, you know, if any of the speakers have particular kinds of feedback that they would want from the audience, unmic yourself, jump in, raise your hand, I can coordinate. Or if anyone in the audience has a question, I know that sometimes having a question right off the bat, you know, you need a minute to sort of absorb and process. You can put them in the chat. You can raise your hand. I'll try to just, you know, do them in order or whatever. We can be very casual about this and just see how it goes. I guess I'll just, you know, I'll just start it off while people are gathering their thoughts. And this is something actually that we haven't talked about at all during the whole month-long residency, but that just occurred to me a little bit in Natalia's talk, but then I was like, oh, I feel like there's like a theme here. So it's not a very well-formed question, but it was sort of around this idea of like nationalism or national identity that emerges through each of these, like, I guess both the sort of techno fix that is imagined, but also in terms of some of the impacts. And I'm just wondering if you feel like it, if you could each respond a little bit to whether that was something that became important or something you've thought about. And Natalia, I don't know if you want to start just because it sort of came from your project, I think because you said it, but then I thought about it in Helen's and Kailey's, you know, as a sort of like Canadian context, but also Tinghao as you were speaking. I was like, all of these have something about nationalism embedded. So Natalia, do you mind me putting you on the spot like that?
It's okay. Yes, actually, nationalism has become something super important in my dissertation because it's highly cultural. And in the case of telecommunications, with ethnography, you can see the value that these systems have. And it's such a natural pride that for me, even for me, I've been able to see it in myself in the way that I speak about these systems. But in the people I'm researching, you can see how the industry alongside the state have this idea that Chile is made through infrastructures and is made through telecommunications. Actually, one time I heard a CEO of one of Chile's major telecom companies saying that the country didn't have anything particular be up. Do you hear me?
Yeah, you're good.
I think that.
Yeah, still good. Yeah.
That didn't have anything in particular to show to the world except for infrastructures. And in Chile, if you ever come, it's highly looked down upon to say something negative about highways, about the subway, and in my case, about 5G, about 4G. It's like something that is really out of context. So yeah, nationalism is super important in this case. And the culture also makes the public policies, so it is there all over the place.
Yeah, that's great. I don't know, Helen, did you have sort of thoughts on that same question?
Yeah, I definitely do. It makes me think immediately to some of Darren Barney and Shane Gunster's work on petronationalism and this Canadian landscape where the fossil fuel industry is almost tied to these long-standing tropes of extractivism, petronationalism, and narratives of ownership and control over natural resources that seem very like uniquely Canadian, at least in my research. And it's interesting to me when I'm thinking about narratives and discourses of climate delayism, because I think that plays really nicely into ideas of nationalism and how that nationalist rhetoric can work towards the delay of meaningful climate action because it is often at odds with this idea of like our oil and like other ethical oil frames that are prominent within these broader discussions about what it means to be Canadian and like consume Canadian oil. So yeah, I think that I could continue on. I think it also relates to like petromasculinities and other ideas of petronostalgia. But I'll stop there.
No, that's great. That's great. And I know there's a couple questions coming in, but Kailey, would you have any sort of responses to that as well? Yeah.
Yeah, definitely kind of, especially it's interesting thinking about building off and lithium being about that transition away from petrocultures as well. Lithium seems to be, at least in the literature, in the South American context, discourses tend to be both backward looking and futuristic. So thinking about political and economic problems of the state as being solved or in some way kind of mobilized differently for these green futures. So I think it's interesting to think about how nationalism, it's almost changing, you know, attempting to do some mediation of national identity as kind of like a green resource economy as opposed to a petro one in the Canadian context. How successful that is, I'm not sure, but that seems, and I guess that's what I'll be looking into the next few years, but that seems to be a theme in the literature in kind of the lithium triangle stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Yeah. And what about you, Tinghao?
I think, yeah, definitely. I think when I think of the idea of nationalism or nationalist, I think of it as, you know, holding this idea of a nation state, and trying to draw this like a clear boundary, at least ideologically, between, you know, what is us and what is the others. And I think what I'm trying to do in this dissertation or in this project is actually to talk about this like two ways in history that how that boundary was being blurred in the process of global e-waste flow and economy, right? So I mean, earlier in the 21st century, it's about this, you know, really liberal the operation of neoliberal media economy that, you know, push e-waste or, you know, to facilitate the flow of e-waste from the global north to the global south. But I think now it became a transitional moment where the Chinese government actively involved itself to, you know, to participate in the global system as well as, you know, another power force to engage in the global media economy. So I think that's a very interesting concept, and I want to think about it more.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I think your answers probably have inspired a bunch of questions. I just saw the chat light up. So Susan, do you want to walk us through the questions in the chat? Or
Sure.
just
Yeah, there's some really great questions, and I think I'll just go in order and take them as we can. So the first question is from A Powered. It's for Kailey, and the question is: do you intend to look at so-called man camps and their impacts on local towns and First Nations communities? Are these negative impacts something governments or companies consider?
Yeah, so while I've been doing kind of a literature review, because I'm hoping to write my proposal this summer, that definitely was a main issue that I was seeing and trying to incorporate into the research, especially thinking about the coloniality and ongoing kind of settler project that unfolds through industry and particularly mining. As it stands right now, where I'm doing my ethnography, it's a very isolated fly in, fly out camp. So there isn't actually an established camp in and around the areas, which involves its own kind of logistics of isolation and the different things and how that impacts three surrounding communities, which are all there's three First Nation communities surrounding the deposit that I'll be going to. And I didn't include it in the talk, but it's something that I'm trying to consider with my supervisor just about respecting Indigenous data sovereignty and how to best kind of approach that about should I be trying to collaborate with these communities while championing kind of their perspectives, or do I want to really try to avoid that kind of extractivist, damage-centered narrative work? So that is definitely something I'm considering. And just something I think over the next few months as I read more about this and kind of collaborate with Indigenous scholars at Queen's that I'm in touch with, I'll help to kind of get a better perspective on how to navigate that.
Thank you, Kailey. Now, Breck Furnace has put some great questions for each person. I'm going to jump over Kailey's to give Kailey a break and go make sure everyone gets some questions. And I'll go to a question for Natalia. And the question is, Breck's question is about the role of aesthetic experience in winning over public support. Are there other examples in Chile of leveraging familiar and comforting visual symbols like the Christmas tree in a public forum for influencing public opinion?
Do I jump in? Yes. Yes, there are many, and actually there's a part of the historians of technology that have studied how companies create pets, mascots, and costumes to promote each infrastructure, especially in electricity. In the Chilean case, you can see kids propaganda or kids-oriented propaganda before and after the dictatorship associated with different systems. And in the case of 5G, for example, I recall that when the state made the turn-on ceremony of the system, they even put Spot, one of these robot dogs from Boston Dynamics, to make the whole situation more friendlier and more like, oh my God, there's a cute dog, robot dog in this scenery. And I think that those particular devices show the spectacularity of the infrastructure, and at the end, they show the performative elements of each system. Actually, also, I remember almost parallel to the antenna battles that I saw, there was another battle, another war that the press called the multi-carrier war in the 90s that also was related to to telephone services, long-distance services in each company, and they were mascots and jingles and advertisements. This is all to say that Chile, due to neoliberalism, is a consumer-oriented society. So just these type of things are super important and also become part of popular culture.
Great, Natalia, thank you. And so Breck also has a question for Helen, and it's building upon your use of Berlant. So Breck is curious to hear more about your understanding of the role of affect and attachments with developing new utopic visions. Oils has fueled visions of the good life and one that people largely want on paper, but it's the various harms and costs that create the cognitive dissonance of cruel or crude optimism. What is the role of aesthetics, the visualization of the vision, to combat extractivist logic and create new forms of utopian thinking?
Thanks for the question. I'm really glad that you asked, because part of my dissertation is actually an image analysis that I'm hoping to do of advertisements, like corporate advertisements specifically, and their visualization of energy futures, which I think are particularly unique. But generally speaking, I would say aesthetics and visual representations of transition or transformation are integral to the way that we understand and imagine new energy futures. They also seem integral to like combating extractivist logics and cultivating new paradigms of thought. And I particularly find the solar punk genre as being really generative for this type of understanding, like the envisioning of counter narratives, especially ones that like promote cultural transformation, and ideas of inclusivity and diversity and harmony with nature seem to be really effective in that genre. And so I, as part of the dissertation, and this chapter actually specifically, I'm going to try to be looking at those images and visualizations and visual representations of transformation to see how they might differ. I haven't looked at them yet, how they might differ from traditional forms of advocacy or activism, like text-based advocacy particularly, and how those also stand up against the visualizations we see from a corporate context, which are like so clearly aligned with what I was speaking about today. And yeah, so I think they're central, and I'm looking forward to kind of digging a bit deeper on that.
Thank you, Helen. And thank you everyone for your questions. I'm going to jump a little bit if that's okay, because I want everyone to have some answer time as well as everyone to get a chance to ask a question. So I'm going to hop over a little bit to Anna Valen, who has a question for Tinghao. If I could put Anna on the spot here.
Oh, hi. Thank you all for those presentations and great topic. Tinghao, I'm really intrigued by your last slide in particular, and your mention of plants and reflecting toxicity and your engagement with art with those plants. I'm wondering if you could expand on that. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you so much for the question. I think this actually goes with I think Brett's question too, when he mentioned is there any local people's how they make arts, or take images of the area and how they social. And I want to clarify that most of the images and arts that I'm using or analyzing in the dissertation are taken either by me in my field trips, or just by investigative journalists, or just the artists who have done their field work and make arts about Guiyu in that specific case. So for this specific chapter, I particularly look at this one Chinese artist called Long Pan, or Pan Lon, who has been actively looking at Guiyu, and she actually went there for a couple of times and do a lot of field work, and then to really interestingly want to use or look at this this particular kind of plant. It's just like the reeds growing along the polluted river, and try to use those, try to kind of use the method of what she called botanical extraction, or a botanical mineralization, trying to extract the toxins or the metals or wasted metals that are being absorbed by the plants. And then this whole process itself is part of her installation art. So I found it super interesting, and I compare it with a couple of the restoration projects that are being proposed by the local government to actually use this kind of plants to restore the environment. And I think this is a very interesting figure for me to think about how plants co-live with toxins, right? And how plant kind of showcase this non-human multi-species agency that is, and really change our thinking about what toxic, for whom something is toxic, right? For whom something is pollution, and how do we think about this concept in a non-human perspective. Yeah.
Thank you for that question and thoughtful answer. So there's a question here from Susan Lord, who highlights what great presentations. I think we can agree, and is wondering about research methods, especially ethnographies, when most of the workers are under NDAs or otherwise precarious in relation to either state or corporate power or violence. And if I can add a little bit to this, and I think this goes on what Susan was saying, I was thinking in all of your presentations about extractivism as methodology, because I think a lot of time in academia, we can think about the way in which conventionally it's about taking out of knowledge of site specificity and processing it within the ivory tower of academia, which can be very disembodied, it can be very exploitative. And I was wondering, as people were studying content-wise extractivism within your work, how you think about it methodologically and how you go about undertaking that work in a caring and careful way, both for yourself as subjects, as well as the site specificity and the people on site, which I think goes with what Susan is asking. So I just, Susan, if you don't mind, I'm piggybacking on your question as well to expand that with my own thinking. And I would love to hear what the group has thought about in terms of your own methods of care. Does anyone have any thoughts on that?
Me?
Great, Natalia, thank you.
In my case, I began my fieldwork knowing about the opacity of mobile systems and knowing that it was going to translate to my research. And it was quite like, I was super sure, like, oh no, it won't affect me, that I won't be able to enter to all of the places that I want to enter. But at the moment that I started to research specifically people working with 5G, became almost like I had a crash and burn, because I was asked several times to leave the room when there was a meeting. I was not invited to everything, but as time passed and I managed my frustrations with my fieldwork, I noticed that every time I encountered something similar to an NDA or something similar to something obstructing my research, was also speaking about the system and how mobile telecommunications are constructed. And that is super interesting. And for me, doing archival research was also an answer to complement everything I was seeing and observing with ethnography.
It's lovely. Thank you, Natalia. Has any of the other presenters thought about any of this? Yeah, Tinghao.
Yeah, I think this is one of the essential questions that I have been thinking a lot on in writing the perspectives is, and also I think here I kind of like touch upon it a little bit. I think the concept of secondhand extraction really speaks to a kind of methodology that as you said, sometimes extraction could be epistemological as well. I think secondhand extraction is trying, at least itself, is a gesture to recognize that those knowledge are not, it's not created by my own, right? It's based on a huge amount of the interviews or observation that I done. So it's the people who spoke to me, and and all of the different kind of bodies and agency and how they speak to me or show to me in a very different ways. So and I, especially in my chapter, my second chapter, when I talk about the smell and how different local people, and actually how the government understands smell, I really want to foreground that position and really put the local human bodies at the beginning, and how difficult it is to translate something like environmental report made by the government or scientific agencies to be comprehensible or understandable by local people, right? So it's there's something there, I think.
Yes, thank you. And I know we're running low on time, but Helen and Kailey, if either of you have thoughts on this, please feel free to share. Helen?
I can just speak briefly. I completed my fieldwork in the fall, and I work with different stakeholder groups. I call them stakeholder groups. I probably shouldn't use use that type of terminology though. So I was looking at oil and gas companies themselves, Suncor predominantly, looking at technological firms and AI firms specifically. And then I also wanted to get worker perspectives and activist perspectives. And so I had different orientations to all of those groups of people while I was doing the field work, because not only would they provide me with different information, but I also had different orientations to them in the way that I was going to be using the information that they would give. And when I talked to union representatives to cover my worker basis, and that was also different than like being, if I talked to oil workers face to face. I've just tried predominantly to center voices, as Tinghao was saying, to always position myself, not only in the interview and interactions with them, but also in the writing, and understand the different contexts and the different understandings of environmental degradation and climate as it relates to oil from those perspectives. And so I think it's a great question, something that we need to probably think more and more about, because yeah, foregrounding the voices and experiences, I think, is just as important as positioning yourself in the way that that information is presented.
Great, Helen. Thank you. Any final thoughts, Kailey, on this?
Yeah, so I can speak to that maybe in a different way because I haven't started to obviously undertake any of my research, but I do know that trying to orient myself and orient my research questions, I have been reading a lot, just even referring to Tallbear's work as well, like with how to, especially with given my interest in kind of these colonial ontologies, and on the other side of that, you have indigenous ontologies about land and life and those as well. So I'm just really trying to emphasize not studying indigenous perspectives on land and resource and what that means, but rather to turn the gaze and study the actual practitioners, so engineers, scientists, and those things in that, taking like a very STS approach to that. So I think that's all I can really say to it at right now because of that. And I'm also in an interesting position because it's through a family member that I'm gaining access to that site as well. So that comes with its own complexities and challenges of really situating yourself within the research and trying to distinguish what topics I should be approaching and what motivations are behind that as well. So that's something that I definitely will be keeping front of mind as I go forward in the next few years of my project.
Thank you, Kailey. And thank you to everyone in the chat. It was a pleasure and easy to curate this. And any questions that weren't asked, I know Mél has recorded everything and we'll make sure everything gets to the presenters.
And I will just plunk in my email there. If anyone wants to be in touch with anyone, then I am happy to relay. I think we lost a few people because originally this was scheduled as an hour-long event. I don't know what I was thinking that would be enough. So, you know, live and learn. But this has been really, really just so enjoyable. And these projects are so sophisticated and inspiring. And it was really just a pleasure to, you know, get to know you and your work. And I hope we all stay in touch. And for everyone else, you know, these pieces will come out in Heliotrope. And I know that the editor is or was actually just left a note in the chat saying how these pieces are marvelous, and looking forward to just like turning them into a piece of kind of public scholarship. So thank you again, everyone, so much. Could not be happier with how this turned out. So yeah, maybe I was gonna say, like, maybe we just hang back for 2 minutes and let all of our guests go. And thank you so much for attending and for all your really great questions. If anyone wants to, yeah, hang back, that would be great. All right. Yeah.
Thank you so